So nice to be with you all again for our weekly, put that right there, lines right there, Christian Witnesses of Jah live discussion show. Number 44.2, in fact. Originally, we kind of started looking at Revelation chapters 12 and 13 in Christian Witnesses of Jah live number 43. And then we were going to progressively look a little closer at parts of those chapters. In particular, the attack by the dragon on the woman and her seed after he was thrown out of heaven. So we did that. We started with number 43 and started looking at Revelation 12 and 13. But I had not considered certain information that ended up, once I considered it, revealing an error or, not making the right connection. And then seeing what I think is a more complete, accurate understanding of these chapters in the book of Revelation, including now chapter 11, which we tied with Matthew 27. Matthew 27 is one of those texts, where it talks about the tombs being broken open and the holy ones appearing to many and people being afraid of them and all these things. Basically, what it describes there after Jesus was put to death, like a resurrection that's very similar, if not identical to Revelation chapter 11, where the two witnesses, whom I believe represent John and Elijah, and John was able to fulfill both of those two witnesses by being the one who cried out in the wilderness, a voice out in the wilderness, and preparing the way for Jah, who came obviously through his son. So, but then you have John being identified with Elijah, denying he's Elijah or the Messiah. But so there's a way in which, and Jesus explicitly said he is Elijah who was to come. So this expectation that they had, first thinking about John in this way, then thinking perhaps Jesus, right? This idea of Elijah really stays all the way, even when he's being put to death, like we've read in parts 43 and part 44.1. This is part 44.2, because we're doing a sub-series to look at this period of attack. This period of attack from the time when the dragon was thrown down. We've talked about the other elements of those texts, so I don't want to get too off into them unless they come up specifically in relation to what we're going to talk about tonight, which is really the finishing of this water attack that the dragon unleashes on the woman and her seed. But then the earth comes to the aid of the woman, right? It helps her. And it deals with this water attack that the dragon unleashes. And then after that happens, the dragon goes off to wage war with the woman and the remaining ones of her seed, those who have the work of bearing witness to God and Jesus, right? We're Christian Witnesses of Jah. Two of our main three beliefs are belief in God, one God the Father, Yahweh. Some say Jehovah, Yahweh. We try to be accommodating, but we have our reasons for believing that Jah in English or Yahweh in Hebrew, Greek. Or, of course, Jah is our fundamental name for referring to God because it's indisputable and occurs in both the Old and New Testaments and doesn't have the pronunciation difficulties that the 3- and 4-letter forms have. Although, again, I think it's fairly clear at this point which form of the divine name, 3- and 4-letter form, stands out, right? The one that's got the best evidence by far over a long period of time by multiple people and texts. Biblical text, right? So they were literally saying how to say the name in the biblical text in Greek characters. The Jews in the Dead Sea Scrolls or the scrolls that they had, right? This was not something unusual. Again, we have even non-Jews referring to this as the name, as what they were hearing, okay? You don't have this with anything else. Not even close. Either way, we're still aware that, people grow up and become familiar with things, and it's not just so easy to change how you refer to God, right? Still, that's why we try to keep it simple, right? One God the Father, Jah, Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, sent forth from heaven to live as the last Adam and to be raised up, given a new name, a new position, God's authority and throne, which we believe he has right now. And so that and the golden rule, those two things, right? So three main beliefs. And I'll be putting up a clip tomorrow that talks a little bit more about our three main beliefs and yet other beliefs in the Bible. And something from a recent show I think came out well, and that would be a good little clip to help people become familiar with who we are, what we do. And then I have another clip tomorrow, 2 clips tomorrow. A second one will be on Michael and the angel of Yahweh, or Yod-Heh-Wah. Hey, right. But, of course, you know how I feel now, right? Same thing to me. Either way, that'll be coming tomorrow. It's a clip that I wanted to do since, one of the early series on, the earliest series, the angel of Jah and Zechariah, one of our earlier videos, maybe even the first one or second. There's a clip in there that I think is very helpful. So I'm going to put that up tomorrow with the other one on CWJ's, Christian Witnesses of Jah. And, hopefully those will be useful. Either way, we try to meet every Saturday, and we're in a series right now, and a sub-series within that series where we're looking at Revelation chapters 12 and 13 originally, but now 11 through 13, and other related texts, like I talked about Matthew 27, right? Very unique chapter of the entire Bible, right? It's been difficult for a lot of people to figure out what's going on there. Even Watchtower's had some pretty interesting interpretations, like the reference to the tombs of the holy ones being broken open and bodies coming out and appearing to many and all that. For a long time, Watchtower, and they may still believe that had to do with an earthquake that is described in those texts and in Revelation 11. But that it was basically the bodies being thrown up, and I guess all the corpses, making people afraid. That's not quite how it reads, though, is it? No. But they tried. So we'll give them that. Now, of course, then they get to Revelation 11, the 2 witnesses I talked about before. I think that's John and Elijah. John and Elijah, 2 witnesses. It all fits pretty much with the timeline and the 3 times, right? And then you have the 3.5 days that they're dead, but that I see as the resurrection of Jesus. And so it's very interesting how these texts read and the signs and symbols. That I think they're interpretable and reasonably so in ways that are consistent with other texts in the context of those texts, other texts in the Bible in the context of the text in question. Now, so I think that's, again, this is not like required stuff. We're just doing our best to kind of make sense of it as Christians. We believe this is important, but we don't believe it's proper to enforce an interpretation that belongs to God as if we have anything more than a reasonable understanding with God's Spirit to make sense of these texts. I think we can. I don't think that means we have to run around. They're not explicit, right? We're interpreting things in a way that's based on the evidence God has given us. And so we're using what belongs to him to make sense of what we have without making so much out of it that it takes away from his identity as God, praising him, right? Worshiping him, one God the Father, the Son, right? The sacrifice. We're going to put our interpretations about those? No way. Golden rule, we should be treating each other. Watchtower, and I'm not picking Watchtower. I come from Watchtower. I can use them as a good example. I know them well. Other groups, this would apply to in similar, if not equal ways, maybe not with respect to Revelation, but other things, right? Trinity. Either way, Revelation stuff, right? Watchtower, gone, right? They're gone. Totally gone. Can't help them. Don't even try. Won't help. It will not help. Probably best to do what they do to you, unless they want to argue with you, in which case they'll violate their own rules just to make you feel bad that you're not jumping on the sinking ship while they go down with it. Best to just avoid them. Just leave them alone. Right? There's nothing we can do for them right now. Unless you're someone who's like, if you're like, we are here to try to help people and give them a lifeline as they kind of fall off from Watchtower. That's one of my biggest fears, right, or concerns. People who would otherwise be effective in a force for Christian good are disillusioned when they figure out what's going on in Watchtower. Of course, this happens in other groups too, but it shouldn't happen with us, right? Why would it? If you're with us, you believe in the one God of the Bible, sent forth Savior that we can prove prior to him coming to the earth in ways that are unique to him and no one else. And we have all these histories and things that are interwoven with both God and this one and us, and then how to treat each other. I think we've got it right. I don't see anything in there that's going to keep people up at night or interfere with normal human relationships, right? Isn't that terrible that our interpretations could rise to such a degree that above the three, we allow our opinions about texts and things that aren't explicit to destroy, right? Basic human relationships that God designed. It's absolutely incredible how groups will do that. They got to be hiding something or something's wrong. If you're going to that extent to protect this stuff and you're obviously wrong and have been wrong and you're wrong, right? Gone, right? You're pretty much willing to sacrifice everything for an idea. It isn't right. It's not like we're just telling you it's not right. It's like, it's not the kind of thing you're supposed to be putting on that level. You know what I'm saying? Christians aren't told to put our end time beliefs above everything else. And you don't agree with us, you know. And so it gets so bizarre. But we have that in other ways too. Like I've said, Watchtower is really a latecomer to this whole shunning and enforcing their unique non-biblical views. And if you don't accept them, boom, right? They will destroy everything. All their opportunities and relationships for these false teachers and liars are proven. This isn't speculation, right? They have changed so many times. Why do we have to say anything at this point? I mean, no. It's like with Trinity though, right? It won't matter. We're going to have to say it again and again. That's why I do these videos and things. Just here, watch this, read this, get out of my face. Unless they're new, right? Someone new, you need help. We're here to help. It's like with the homos and pervs, right? We don't want to be around abusive people that put down our religion, mock God, and a lot of stuff, But if they're like trying, someone I know or someone new, and they're like, hey, man, I know, I perv out and I'm trying, I need help. I'm not justifying the perversions and I'm just trying, man. Can you help me out? Oh, yeah, I'll be right there. I'm the one who will help you out. The ones who are with you, your perv friends, they are absolutely going to make sure that you die. Perving out, okay? Just know that for a fact. Think about it. You know it's true. And if that's true, well, you know what to do, right? What do we got here, by the way? Swedish Lutheran. Yes, very nice. God bless. Born-again Englishman, you are always on fire. I had to point that out because I realized you're pretty pumped up, aren't you? I would say, if I met born-again Englishmen, I would think this guy is on fire. He is active, right? He's very pumped up about things. That's how the feeling I get. Bankhead. What else do you need to say, right? We all know what's going on there. Betsy, same thing. Praise Jah. That's it. All these people. It's very nice to have you. So We're still kind of in the preamble. We'll get to the text in a minute. We got some good stuff. Right? Again, if you follow our show, you watch Redeem, and it's okay that, not many do. Remember, most groups don't really like us. No Trinity people are going to promote us or help us in any way. They may think we're kind of nice or whatever. I don't know. They're not going to support us. Okay, that's just not going to happen. Think about it. Watchtower people. No way, right? Not happening. No. So who else is there, really? There's just that you shouldn't have an expectation that doesn't match reality is what I'm saying. Right? We got to have just know that, the same with Jesus, same with everybody, right? We're not the majority. We're not going to be this magnet for the whole world. And they're just going to be like, whoa, praise Jah, Jesus, golden rule, let's go. That's like the opposite of what they stand for, right? Not that every group and stuff is opposite of that, but a lot of them are really built on profit, right? In some way, not PROPHET either. And we're not, right? I don't do this for money. Like I've said before, when I say I don't have anything to lose doing this, I have a lot to lose if I'm bread and wine there, teaching false and stuff. I have tons to lose, of course. My reputation, my standing before God, everything. But I don't have anything to lose when it comes to the things other groups do, right? I'm not doing this for money. That's a big difference. And I think that's a big difference for you too, right? You realize that. So we know we're smaller, but well represented, I would say, especially for our size. We've got a pretty good representation around the earth. It's interesting. So I'm confident that over time, right, especially as other groups just collapse, right, or get exposed more, we're just going to get more exposure because people are going to realize, okay, I can still believe in Jehovah, Jah, no Trinity, right? Or the Trinitarians. So Trinitarians are kind of, a lot. I get emails and people who say things. I've seen some good responses recently. But, I don't want them to lose their faith even if they stay Trinitarian, right? It's not what this is about. It's like with Watchtower. We don't want them to lose their faith. But we don't want them to have their faith in Watchtower. The same with Trinitarians. It's different, but, and they all think we're crazy. We're like heretics and papas. We're the only ones not doing it for money. Well, I mean only ones the big ones. And we're just promoting a few things that are pretty clear, right? So interesting why they hate us so much for these things. It does make me think, well, there's something there. It's not really numbers and size. It's especially when you look at the Bible, right? It's really never that. It's more really people doing what's right when a lot of people don't care or are embracing what's wrong. Really whacked out stuff, fully perved out of their mind, gone, right? It's not like they're presenting us with a better way and saying, hey, Greg, hey, you Christians, witnesses of Jah, or whatever you Christians are, we've got this way over here. You guys think you have the way, right, Jesus? You think that? We've got a way over here. Right. All you have to do is take a cock in your ass. Yeah. Just put a wiener in your excretory organ and let us abuse you. And you won't believe it, right? It's going to be the best thing ever. No, you're stupid and a pervert. Are you crazy? No, that's clearly not how your penile organ is designed or made. But again, everyone, if we don't defeat this perv uprising, then no one's going to care about Jah, Jesus. We can't even stand up to the pervs. I can't believe it, quite honestly. I love talking about the Bible, and we're going to get to it. You watch. I'm a lot disappointed we don't see a stronger reaction against perv. It blows my mind. I think the younger generation has seen it, right? They're seeing all the anal cancer, all the pervs, right? They have to, they know, right? All these clubs and establishments where all this perv stuff they are dying because these people are dead morally. They're dead spiritually. The only thing they have is something physical, usually, and a lot of drinking and other stuff. But once that physical goes, or once you realize you're perving out, right, it's over. You got to almost start from ground zero. I know a lot of people like this, and it's just a lot of them, there's no way out. And a lot of people are like this in a different way too. Talked about recently, like with spiritual stuff. I've said it, man. Every 10 years I say it seems, and then you just look at it, it's like, oh yeah, definitely. I can't stop. You can do the same thing because they don't really care. You take that away from them. You take these non-Christian things that they kind of somehow get a dopamine hit or whatever from, but that are totally against the Bible, whether it's promoting false doctrine, trying to convert people to a false religion with totally gone views on chronology, prophecy, and all this stuff, and their leadership, right? Okay, no, we're not trusting you even 1%, let alone 100%. And by the way, gone, right? You're out of here. You guys are crazy. You guys have literally destroyed your credibility in all these very clear biblical doctrines that now we will continue to preserve apart from your insanity, Watchtower. Oh, I can't believe it, man. So, and I see these people continuing to try to get many of us to jump onto a sinking ship. It's not bad enough. It's not enough that they've all jumped back onto a ship that's going down. They're like yelling from the ship as it's going down, saying, hey, you should be on here with us. That's how much they care about us. That's how much they care about themselves. It's all an illusion, right? It's just like the Bible says. God wants to see who believes the lie. It's like in Eve's head, right? She had this idea. It's just a lie. These lies. Everybody listening to liars and all these perverts, right? If you're taking advice, I've said this before, but it blows my mind, right? If you're taking advice from an LGBTQ plus non-hetero, you're stupid, right? They don't even know how to use their body. They're part of the fastest ending and most disease-ridden and drug-infested, perverted community on the planet. And you're what? You're taking advice on relationships? Gone, right? It's over. You know how many, it's game over for so many right now? They're going to have to fight their way back. They're going to have to fight their way back into a mental and spiritual hetero mode. Non-perv, right? No anal and hetero. That's perv. Porneia. Gone, right? You don't know where to put your penis, or you don't know what your anus is for, you are not smart. To say the least, right? All right, so I had to get a little of that out because everything's happening. Everyone's perved out. So many people spend all their life arguing about the Trinity while the world is, sodomizing itself. Makes no sense. Trust me, you're not missing nothing. We've been arguing about the Trinity for thousands of years, and it will continue for the rest of the days of this system. So you will never miss nothing. But if you allow people's rear end to get sodomized, you can't recover that. Okay? So I think a lot of you, or many people anyway, they've lost it, right? They don't even know what a priority is anymore. They don't have the courage to have the right priorities. With that in mind, let's get to our topic. Okay, we got good stuff. I said hello to everyone. There's just so much. So we're not really reading the Bible tonight, though, because we're reading accounts from histories, Roman histories in this case, that deal with periods in the Bible. Now, we've been talking, as I mentioned at the outset, specifically in this series and sub-series from part 43 and the redo through to part 44, point 2 right now. I'm probably going to do about 5 or 6 subparts. So part 44 to point 5 or 6, because we're going to go from tonight to basically 69, 70. But we're going to stop there, and then next week, part 44.3, we're going to cover the Jewish War, which also includes this period of the Romans that we're going to focus on primarily from Nero's reign through to 69, basically 70, to before the time when the Jewish War was completed. Vespasian has been recalled, and they reached the point in our reading tonight in the Annals and Histories of Tacitus, Roman historian, where Vespasian appoints Titus to finish the Jewish War. So we're right there at 69. Next week, we're going to go right into that war. We're going to read the period of Titus, so it'll bring us back a little and then forward, but it's going to focus mostly on the events of the Jewish War that would have affected the Christians in Jerusalem and then the surrounding areas, okay? Tonight, we're going to be reviewing the effects that Rome had on the Christians, specifically in Rome, but elsewhere too, from basically the time of Nero, as I said, to 69. Now, previously, we've talked about how after the dragon was thrown out of heaven, and he released this water after the woman, the earth comes to the woman's aid, absorbs the water, the dragon goes wage war. The dragon then stands on the shore of the sea, and a wild beast comes out, a multi-beast beast. It's like a leopard, a lion, and a bear. It has 7 heads like the dragon and crowns like the dragon. And the dragon's the one who brings him out. So I believe that beast represents the dragon's continuation of his attack against the woman and her seed. And that this initial water attack was the efforts by the dragon to try to get to the woman, because it says that he tried to get to the woman after he was thrown out of heaven. But first he was in heaven before the woman, trying to get to the child. See the prior videos if you want more on that. And then when he was unsuccessful, the other angels came back because he had thrown them down to the earth while the woman was about to give birth. Then she did, he failed, they came back, Michael and him battled, the angels battled, and they were thrown down. Dragon was very angry. And he attacked the woman with the water, right? And it was an attack that was defeated or blunted by the earth. So we looked at the accounts in Acts exclusively in our 44.1. And we saw how there were many efforts by the Jews and Greeks and some Romans, but not in an official way, because of their doctrines or beliefs, like there comes to be, as you're going to see tonight. In fact, all throughout the book of Acts, the Roman officials don't see anything wrong with the Christians' views. Every time that they're interrogated or brought before the Roman officials, they don't see a problem with them. He starts impressing them. Some just want him for his money. There's one time where he expels a demon from a slave girl, and Romans who owned her, Roman citizens, could have been Greeks who were Roman citizens or Romans. Either way, they were Romans, and they attacked them. And then they brought up charges against them and started, because of their beliefs, they started making complaints, but it didn't work. But they were mostly concerned about the money that he cost them, not their beliefs. They were just using that after he already did that to the girl. The Roman officials didn't accept it as a legitimate basis. Every time they said he doesn't deserve death. It's totally different from what you're going to see tonight. Now, in the book of Acts, there are Roman emperors, of course. There's Tiberius, Claudius the First, Caligula. So, nevertheless, those emperors are not described or spoken of as attacking the Christians the way another emperor is. There are problems with both of those emperors, and almost all of them, I guess, but maybe not to the same degree by far. Certainly becomes a period of insanity with Caligula, and he had a head issue, but nevertheless, that can also relate to demon possession, and we know how Satan entered in the heart of Judas, and he can do these things. He's now on the earth, filled with rage. He's able to take control of this beast. He's able to disguise himself as a lamb. So, but when he shoots this water, the water doesn't get to the woman. He thinks he can, though, but it doesn't. It doesn't happen. And that's very similar to what we see all throughout Acts. We see Jews, we see Greeks, and partially Romans, but mostly we see the Romans blunting or stopping what would otherwise have been a death attack, right? They would have all died. If the Jews and the Greeks and those who were accusing, even the Romans that I mentioned on the slave girl, had gotten their way in the book of Acts, they would have all died. And that's exactly what the dragon was trying to do with the water, to kill the woman, to drown her. It's what it represents. It said that, to try to drown her. But it wasn't able to. The earth helped it. And we talked about how the Romans often didn't comply. They didn't allow it to happen, right? We see it in Pilate too, but that had to happen, right? But Pilate was like, kind of like, I don't want to deal with this. Has nothing to do with us. You guys are crazy, right? You Jews and all these beliefs and all your divisions and all these things. But he finally just said, fine, it's weird. My wife's having dreams, all these things. So there was a lot happening, but it had to happen. These other deaths didn't necessarily have to happen the way they did. There's nothing that foretold that the Christians would have to be killed for sport or burned alive. That sounds like something a very angry dragon would do, though. And so we see in Acts these attacks, these attempts to kill the Christians, assassinate them even, right? Many conspirators sent after Paul and others. And it was a big problem. They would have all been killed, but the Romans wouldn't let it happen. And there are certain rules, as we have discussed, with regard to the different nations that have existed and that exist and that are over us, that Jah has allowed his sons and Satan and his son, the firstborn one now with all authority and power, to oversee and manage while we go through this period of judgment. So Satan gets thrown to the earth. There's a change in this arrangement to some extent. He's now concentrated on the earth, not allowed to go to heaven anymore. And the Bible says he attacks the woman. Well, we see that in Acts. We saw the Holy Spirit manifest after Jesus was raised to heaven, just like he said in John 14, 15, 16, Father will give me Holy Spirit. I will send the helper. The book of Acts describes him as being seated at the right hand of the Father and receiving Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit allowed the followers of Jesus after his resurrection to speak in many different languages in those areas that allowed for the message to be carried abroad. It manifested as fire. So the dragon would have to go after the Christians and where the Holy Spirit is, if that's who this woman is that gave birth to the child. See prior parts for more on that. So it does seem to me to fit that this river attack is that Satan was thrown down out of heaven after Jesus was raised to the right hand of the Father, was caught away to God into his throne, and the woman fled away for 3.5 years. And then Satan and the dragon and his angels fought with Michael and were thrown out. After that period of time, salvation was opened up to everybody. So it seems to me that these events do fit the period of time from Jesus' death and resurrection to events shortly thereafter. And then we get to, we get a little further away from, the period in the first part of Acts where Jesus is raised, the Holy Spirit is poured out. Then you get all these different witnesses that are given by Paul and Peter and others. And they cover a period of time that people believe basically leads at the end of the book of Acts to the early 60s, which would be about 5 years into Nero's reign when he started in the mid-50s. He was a young man. And so he didn't go insane right away. In fact, for the first few years, Nero was very much beloved, I guess you could say. But then he went nuts, right? He perved out, freaked out, went nuts, or someone took control of him, or he had a willing host, however you want to look at it. But I'm going to show you tonight that by the time of Nero and no one else, things changed. So by the year 60, you could say, give or take a few years. By few, I mean 2 to 3 to 4, maybe a few more. It depends, right? Because Nero lived into the late 60s. And so some of the events that we read about or that we associate with Paul and others, we don't have the exact years. But by the year 60 and following, I think it's safe to say Nero had begun to go crazy and act in ways that weren't normal. And they specifically involved the Christians. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this period first. I mentioned Caligula, right? So he was in the mid-30s to early 40s. And then you had Claudius, early 40s, right to Nero's reign. But as I said, only Nero was the first to target the Christians. There were problems. The Christians were often lumped together with the Jews. They were more the attack of the Jews at this point, though, and seen as a sect of the Jews. And you could see things starting to change with respect to some of these emperors, and like I mentioned, Caligula. Sorry, kind of comes out wrong unless I say it a little slowly. Who went nuts, but Nero really targeted the Christians. So whether we had situations involving Caligula or Claudius that would have resulted in the deaths of Christians, in my view, based on what we've read in the book of Acts and in the histories of these Roman emperors, it would depend on whether or not they broke their laws. If it was just the beliefs of the Christians, their beliefs about Jesus, unless it was specifically things they brought them up on with regard to this whole him being king thing, they would not have done anything, I don't think. And we see this all throughout Acts. They could have done whatever they wanted. They didn't see, to them, it was strange that the Jews were making this such a big deal. They already knew the Jews had these disagreements about the resurrection and this stuff. So they're like, why are you bothering us with this stuff? But with Nero, right, that didn't matter. See, there was a degree of irrationality and hatred unlike anyone before him toward the Christians, for sure. All right, so let's take a look at it. Let's go ahead and bring up sections of Tacitus's histories. And I'll mention this now, but you'll see in a moment as when we read it. Nero also, he wasn't just irrational and beast-like, right? If you see him as sort of the start, I don't know exactly where I would say this change occurred from the water attack, the earth absorbing it. I see that as happening all throughout Acts and to the end. So getting close to, if not in the time of Nero. But again, whether or not this part of Revelation is the water attack or the beast involving Claudius or Caligula, I can't say. I would certainly say it's part of the water attack. And at this point, I would say Nero basically represents where the beast attack began, where the beast itself was the weapon. And the beast is described in ways that are consistent really only with the Roman Empire at the time. The way it defeats people with the sword, takes them captive, is wondered at admiringly. I think you're going to see also this whole head that had a fatal wound and got healed. Fits Rome perfectly. I've mentioned a couple of ways, but tonight I think you're going to see that this period of 66 to 70, or really 68 to 69, but I look at it as the whole period where a lot was happening, and possibly even a lot of the events that we're reading about this evening. But more so when these four emperors from 68 to 69 occurred, and resulting in Vespasian ultimately. But it was a period really unlike any other, as you're going to see. And that's how it was described. And at this point, I would say that's the fatal head strike that got healed. I'm not 100% like absolute on it. I think there's a couple other candidates, but whether it's Caesar and Pompey or other events in Roman history, I don't see this things like Hannibal or things like that. I mean, it seems like it would have to be something related to the period that we're talking about. Not necessarily, but there's certainly a great candidate here that is unlike any of those periods. And so let's just take a look at it and you can tell me what you think. We're going to read Tacitus, Histories, Book 1. Let me go ahead and bring up the version I have. 1, and then I'll bring you guys up here. Thank you all for joining me, by the way. Christian Witnesses of Jah, number 44.2. What we do, study the Bible, right? We're talking about Revelation right now. It's not required doctrine, but we are interested in it. We think it's important. So we look at it and we try to make sense of it the best we can. With that in mind, I'm going to bring up Tacitus, Roman historian, the 1st and 2nd century, and we're going to take a look at it. So I have this text file here. I'm going to read from this text file I have that I got from the online version that you'll see referenced. It'll be easier for me to search some of these online editions of these older works. Although there are newer editions, but none of them, those are online. These, some of these online editions, they're in these text forms, and they're just not as easy as you would think they are. But either way, okay, let's see. Let's see what this looks like. Make that a little bigger first, and then I'll bring you guys up. Let's see what this looks like. So it's not quite, I wonder if I bold it, if that will. Okay, once I get to the part I'm going to read, I'll bold it like that so it's easier for you guys to see. Like I told you, some of these text files and the way they were online, they were either not searchable enough or they weren't labeled enough. Like this one right here. It's from the Internet Classics Archive, Histories, Tacitus, translated by Alfred John Church, William Jackson Broadrib, Book 1. But, as you go down, the paragraphs aren't numbered. So I have to count them, right, from my notes and stuff. It just wasn't the exact, you'd have to subscribe and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, because I have my volumes right here and everywhere. And so I read it direct and then I go to the online edition, and usually it's pretty easy to correspond it, but sometimes it's not. And so the version on Perseus, the Perseus site, it's not the same as this one. So, and the numbers are a little different. So I just went ahead and got this whole text, and I'll search for it as I need to. But in this case, we're going to start at the very, very opening part. So this is book 1, first 3 paragraphs. Let me go ahead and bold them. Let's see what these say. All right. So we're in the year 69. Tacitus is talking, he's describing what's happening, right? So Nero just died. And Tacitus has that he was killed at the house of his freedmen. Suetonius says he killed himself. Either way, maybe there's a combination too there, but nonetheless, let's read the opening of Tacitus's Histories, book 1, first 3 paragraphs, okay? This is about the year 69, after Nero has been killed. We're first going to read the parts from after Nero was killed, dealing with those 4 emperors, Nero being one of them. And then we're going to review all the way through to Vespasian, but briefly, right? I'm just going to give the highlights. And then we're going to go back to Nero, okay? So that's why we're starting after he died, because we're going to go back to him. And there's a reason why. I think it's important that you see the environment, that you understand the impact that I believe the dragon had on Rome, right? That, remember, the dragon is utilizing this beast to attack the woman and her seed. But he's got something's going on in Revelation 12 and 13 where he gets thrown out of heaven. He's on the earth. He's mad at the woman and her seed. He disgorges the water. The earth then comes to the woman's aid. And the dragon gets madder or angry, right? He gets angry and he goes off to wage war. And he stands on this seashore until this beast comes out. So he's doing something. We don't know how this works, right? We don't know the mechanics, let alone the metaphysics, right? Which is basically what I'm talking about in this case. How he does what he does, right? What does he have to do to get influence over something? What exactly is it that lets him go into Judas but not Pilate? Right? Well, what is it that lets him do this water attack, but then he can do this beast attack? What is it he's doing is what I'm saying. We won't be able to answer it, but I think it's important to think about, because that's what the imagery is showing us. He's doing something. Whatever he's doing, he's attacking the woman. It's for this purpose. Everything is for this purpose. The water attack, the multi-beast attack, and the dragon like a lamb. All of it. And I think that's exactly what you're going to see. And all the way through, right after tonight, we're going to do the Jewish war, like I said, next week, part 44.3. After that, we're going to go from basically 70 after the Jewish war through to the time of Trajan, right, where we get Pliny's letter to Trajan. We're going to basically consider that whole period and that letter again, those letters. And then after that, we'll go further into the 2nd century. And I'll give brief summaries of key areas, key times and events that will show you, I think, the continuation of this multi-beast attack. I think it starts with Nero, or right around there. Definitely by that time. There's no question in my mind, at least as far as I see it, right? I think that's, what else could it, I mean, if it's not that, well, he's targeting the Christians. He's gone crazy. And he's part of this beast that has these abilities to take people captive, kill by the sword, has the authority of the dragon. And there's more. But it seems to me like there's a difference between what Nero's doing and what happened before. It doesn't look to me like the emperors or the Romans are involved almost at all. They're involved because the others are involving them. Or there's that one, the money issue with the slave girl and the demon, but it's not a targeted attack. Nowhere. Not that I can see. Until Nero. So I see the Romans as really the impediment to the dragon's water attack initially. So he's got to do something to change that. What he has to do and how it works, we don't know. We know he has some authority. We know he's still the God of this system of things. We know Jesus can check him anytime, but he's letting these things happen, and the Satan has authority. He's the ruler of this world, even after being thrown out. But he's not in charge anymore. He's just allowed to rule. He even says that. It's been given to him, and that was before he was thrown out. So we know this is conditional. So he's got to do something. We don't know exactly what he's got to do. But he's able to do it. He's able to get into these environments and change things, right? So if the Romans were in his way before, wouldn't it make sense that he would want to change that? Especially given that with them, he could do a lot more. Right? If that's his goal, you see what I'm saying? Look, we have to be able to match this with historical events. So we're reading the text, they're telling us these things. What happened? Well, if during these times we're considering, we get these kind of attacks, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what's happening here? Where's the dragon? Is the dragon somewhere else? Right? I don't see that. I don't see why he would be anywhere else, number one. And why would he want to use anyone but Rome, especially after that initial attack, right? Once he realized that they were in his way, he wasn't able to use them enough to get the first attack done. He did something different. And all of a sudden, here's this beast that can kill with the sword, take captive, and it comes out of the earth and it attacks the woman in her seed. Boom. That's a big deal. That's like, okay, so the dragon would be here. He would use Rome. And guess what? The historical sources tell us that's exactly what happened. Not that the dragon took control of Rome, but that the events are consistent with the dragon taking control of Rome. All right, let's look at the first 3 paragraphs of Tacitus's Histories, Book 1. Writing about the time of January to March, the year 69. All right, so basically 36 years after Jesus was killed and resurrected. And during the time of the Jewish War, where there's kind of a change happening, it's not completed yet. We'll talk about more next week. Tacitus. I'm getting over a cold. I'm doing better, but there's a little congestion still. I should be good. I begin my work with the time when Servius Galba was consul for the second time with Titus Vinius for his colleague. Of the former period, the 820 years dating from the founding of the city. Let me get my picture there. Well, I guess that'll be okay for now. Many authors have treated, and while they had to record the transactions of the Roman people, they wrote with equal eloquence and freedom. After the conflict at Actium, and when it became essential to peace, that all power should be centered in one man, these great intellects passed away. Then, too, the truthfulness of history was impaired in many ways. At first, through men's ignorance of public affairs, which were now wholly strange to them, then through their passion for flattery, or, on the other hand, their hatred of their masters. And so between the enmity of the one and the servility of the other, neither had any regard for posterity. So history and things of importance were being ignored, forgotten. But he was not. He was trying not to, right? But while we instinctively shrink from a writer's adulation, we lend a ready ear to distraction and spite, because flattery involves the shameful imputation of servility, whereas malignity wears the false appearance of honesty. I myself knew nothing of Galba, or Otho, or of Vitellius, either from benefits or from injuries. I would not deny that my elevation was begun by Vespasian, augmented by Titus, and still further enhanced by Domitian. But those who profess inviolable truth must speak of all without partiality and without hatred. Make sure I have reserved as an employment for my old age, should my life be long enough, a subject at once more fruitful and less anxious, in the reign of the divine Nerva and the empire of Trajan, enjoying the rare happiness of times when we think what we please and express what we think. Right? That's kind of rare, especially today, right? You start talking about the LGBTQ homos, they freak out. You start describing what they actually do, they freak out. Why? Because they're pervs. I am entertaining on the history of a period rich in disasters, frightful in its wars, torn by civil strife. This is what I want you to remember, that he's describing the times. 69. It's what was happening. Torn by civil strife and even in peace full of horrors. 4 emperors perished by the sword. There were 3 civil wars. There were more with foreign enemies. There were often wars that had both characters at once. There was success in the east and disaster in the west. There were disturbances in Illyricum. Gaul wavered in its allegiance. Britain was thoroughly subdued and immediately abandoned. The tribes of the Suevi and the Sarmati rose in concert against us. The Dacians had the glory of inflicting us as well as suffering defeat. The armies of Parthia were all but set in motion by the cheat of a counterfeit Nero. Now, too, Italy was prostrated by disasters either entirely novel or that recurred only after a long succession of ages. Cities in Campania's richest plains were swallowed up and overwhelmed. Rome was wasted by conflagrations, its oldest temples consumed, and the capital itself fired by the hands of citizens. Sacred rites were profaned. There was profligacy in the highest ranks. The sea was crowded with exiles, and its rocks polluted with bloody deeds. In the capital there were yet worse horrors. Nobility, wealth, the refusal or acceptance of office were grounds for accusation, and virtue ensured destruction. Virtue ensured destruction. The rewards of the informers were no less odious than their crimes. For while some seized on consulships and priestly offices as their share of the spoil, others on procuratorships and posts of more confidential authority, they robbed and ruined in every direction amid universal hatred and terror. Slaves were bribed to turn against their masters and freedmen to betray their patrons. And those who had not an enemy were destroyed by friends. One more. Tacitus, History's Book 1, opening paragraphs 1 through 3. Yet the age was not so barren. As not also to exhibit examples of virtue. Mothers accompanied the flight of their sons. Wives followed their husbands into exile. There were brave kinsmen and faithful sons-in-law. There were slaves whose fidelity defied even torture. There were illustrious men driven to the last necessity and enduring it with fortitude. There were closing scenes that equaled the famous deaths of antiquity. Besides the manifold vicissitudes of human affairs, there were prodigies in heaven and earth. The warning voices of thunder and other intimations of the future, auspicious or gloomy, doubtful or not to be mistaken. Never surely did more terrible calamities of the Roman people, or evidence more conclusive, prove that gods take no thought for our happiness, but only for our punishment. That's how he was looking at this period of time, specifically this period of 69 and surrounding it, where these four emperors came and went, or in the case of Vespasian, at least continued. But there was a radical rotation of emperors, unlike anything before seen, and also desecrations, as you're going to see, that were unlike anything previously. So with that in mind, let's jump down now. Let me first just make sure you guys are doing okay and that we don't have, all right. So people who have questions, they can just read the text and try to figure them out. Questions unrelated to the topic, we're not going to do it tonight. So let's try to focus. If you're not able to do that, that's fine, but we are. So I highly encourage you to develop that ability, and then you won't have to worry about days, months, and seasons, things that we're told we're not supposed to judge people over. And it might help you focus better so you don't get off topic and your mind wander and you collapse, okay? That way you might learn something and you can help people. Very nice, I guess. All right, so that having been dealt with, let's return to the subject. What was our reading? Oh, yeah. So let's go to the 7th paragraph now. So that was paragraph 3 is 4. Remember, I told you they aren't numbered, right? I think that was 5. Okay, yeah, right here. He goes on to say, the freedmen in their excessive power were now putting up everything for sale. The slaves caught with greedy hands at immediate gain, right? I'm giving you kind of highlights of descriptions Tacitus is providing of this period of time. So I'm skipping some material that doesn't explicitly do that so we can get it all and move on to the other stuff. The freedmen in their excessive power were now putting up everything for sale. The slaves caught with greedy hands at immediate gain and reflecting on their master's age hastened to be rich. The new court had the same abuses as the old, abuses as grievous as ever, but not so readily excused. Even the age of Galba caused ridicule and disgust among those whose associations were with the youth of Nero, and who were accustomed, as is the fashion of the vulgar, to value their emperors by the beauty and grace of their persons. You see a lot of that today, right? And of course, you end up with some of the worst people you could possibly imagine. Because again, like with racists and others, you can't see past what you're seeing. All you see is this. And then you get horror because you don't look deeper. So he says here in book 1, paragraph 16, let Nero be ever before your eyes. It's okay. Come on. Come on. All right, I'll let her do her thing. I was trying to keep her from the wine. Let Nero be ever before your eyes, swollen with the pride of a long line of Caesars. It was not Vindex with his unarmed province. It was not myself with my single legion that shook his yoke from our necks. It was his own profligacy, his own brutality, and that though there had been before no precedent of an emperor condemned by his own people. There had been before no precedent of an emperor condemned by his own people. See, Nero was something unusual. Gone, right? Totally gone. Like making Caligula look normal, gone. Totally. We who have been called to power by the issues of war and by the deliberate judgment of others shall incur unpopularity, however illustrious our character. Nero will always be regretted by the thoroughly depraved because they're perverts, right? They perv out and then it's just over for them. But Nero was a mega perv. You're going to see that even more so. It's coming up here. So let's go back to book 3 now. We're going to read that part right here. All right, so we're still reading about the period in around 69 involving events after Nero was killed and also events involving Nero, but we're going to focus more on those in just a moment. Okay, right now we're kind of describing this whole period of the 4 Caesars where a lot happened in ways that, like we've read already, it was very unusual and unique in Rome's history. And we're trying to, in one sense, through this material, identify where this head that had a fatal wound and got healed might be. If this beast is basically the Roman Empire, or includes it with respect to Satan taking control of it, then where is this head getting fatally wounded and healed in connection with it? Well, I believe that this period here could very well be that period where there was more turmoil and sacrilege and carnage in ways that, well, were different than any other period. And so we'll just let the Roman historian continue to describe it. Let's read from here. Martialis had hardly returned to the capital when the infuriated soldiery arrived without any leader, every man acting on his own impulse. They hurried at quick march past the forum and the temples which hang over it. I can make this a little bigger. And advanced their line up the opposite hill as far as the outer gates of the capital. There were formerly certain colonnades on the right side of the slope as one went up. The defenders issuing forth on the roof of these buildings showered tiles and stones on the Vitilianists, right? Because you had at this point, you had the ongoing civil war, but involving Vitellius and Vespasian and those loyal to them. The assailants were not armed, and Vitellius also with others, but ultimately with Vespasian. The assailants were not armed with anything but swords, and it seemed too tedious to send for machines and missiles. They threw lighted brands on a projecting colonnade, and following the track of the fire would have burst through the half-burnt gates of the Capitol, had not Sabinus tearing down all sides of the statues, the glories of former generations, formed them into a barricade across the opening. This is all happening as part of this civil war during the period of 68 to 69, basically. Then they assailed the opposite approaches to the capital near the grove of the Asylum, and where the Tarpeian rock is mounted by 100 steps. Both these attacks were unexpected. The closer and fiercer of the two threatened the Asylum. The assailants could not be checked as they mounted the continuous line of buildings, which, as was natural in a time of profound peace, had grown up to such a height as to be on a level with the soil of the capital. A doubt arises at this point whether it was the assailants who threw lighted brands on the roofs, or whether, as the more general account has it, the besieged thus sought to repel the assailants, who were now making vigorous progress. This isn't the fire involving Nero, by the way. This is just more of the consequence of this period during which I believe one of the heads of the beast was fatally wounded and then healed. From them, the fire passed to the colonnade adjoining the temples. The eagles supporting the pediment, which were of old timber, caught the flames. And so the capital, with its gates shut, neither defended by friends nor spoiled by a foe, was burnt to the ground. So the capital was burnt to the ground. This was the most deplorable and disgraceful event that had happened to the Commonwealth of Rome since the foundation of the city. This was the most deplorable and disgraceful event that had happened to the Commonwealth of Rome since the foundation of the city. For now, assailed by no foreign enemy, with heaven ready to be propitious, had our vices only allowed, the seat of Jupiter, supremely good and great, founded by our ancestors with solemn auspices to be the pledge of empire, the seat which neither Porsenna, when the city was surrendered, nor the Gauls, when it was captured, had been able to violate. Was destroyed by the madness of our emperors. Once before, indeed, during civil war, the capital had been consumed by fire, but then only through the crime of individuals. Now it was openly besieged and openly set on fire. And what were the motives of this conflict? What the compensation for so great a disaster? Was it for our country we were fighting? King Tarquinius Priscus had vowed its erection in his war with the Sabines, and had laid the foundations on a scale which suited the hopes of future greatness, rather than what the yet moderate resources of Rome could achieve. After him, Servius Tullius, heartily assisted by the allies, and Tarquinius Superbus, employing the spoils of war from the conquered Suessa Palmitia, raised the superstructure. But the glory of its completion was reserved for the days of liberty, after the expulsion of the kings. Horatius Pulvilius, in his second consulate, dedicated it, a building so magnificent that the vast wealth afterwards acquired by the people of Rome served to embellish rather than increase it. It was rebuilt on the same site when, after an interval of 415 years, it was burnt to the ground in the consulate of Lucius Scipio and Caius Norbanus. Sulla, after his final triumph, undertook the charge of restoring it, but he did not live to dedicate it. The one thing denied to his uniform good fortune. The name Lutatius Catullus, the dedicator, remained among all the vast erections of the emperors, down to the days of Vitellius. This was the building that was now on fire. It's a big deal. This is why he said there's nothing like this ever happened. This is the most deplorable and disgraceful event ever. So we not only had these, repeated deaths of the emperors, but we had all kinds of other actions and destruction that very much threatened Rome itself. And let's see, I think that was where we were that's where we're going to end that part. So let's go ahead and move a little bit further. and read book 1. This will be much easier. Sorry it took me a little second to find this one, but again, because of the format, this is easier though. Hey, where is that? I just had it. Okay, so book 4. Now we're in November AD 70. Okay. Tacitus's Histories. This is the last part of the histories, and then we're going to go to the annals and read more about Nero. Okay, and then we're going to partake and we'll be done. Thank you all for joining me. Christian Witnesses of Jah live discussion. Number 44.2. We'll be back next Saturday, Jah willing, for 44.3, where we're going to look closer at the Jewish War, which kind of overlaps with some of what we're reading tonight. But we're focusing on this period where I believe began the multi-beast attack, or very close to it, and that represents potentially, strongly potentially in my view, this fatal wound to one of the heads of the beast that got healed. All right, we're going to read the full first paragraph to here. Tacitus Histories, Book 4. When Vitellius was dead, the war had indeed come to an end, but peace had yet to begin. Sword in hand, throughout the capital, we changed that, we did this for a marking. Let's search. Sword in hand, throughout the capital, the conquerors hunted down the conquered with merciless hatred. The streets were choked with carnage. The squares and temples reeked with blood. For men were massacred everywhere as chance threw them in the way. Soon as their license increased, they began to search for and drag forth hidden foes. Whenever they saw a man tall and young, they cut him down, making no distinction between soldiers and civilians. But the ferocity, which in the first impulse of hatred could be gratified only by blood, soon passed into the greed of gain. I want you to think about that. And there's more. There's a ferocity here that's different, much different than anything we've read about in the book of Acts. And a lot of it was pretty ferocious. This is way beyond that. And any Christian who would have been in the way of these people would have been treated the same way, right? And remember, the dragon's going after the woman and her seed. So, and this is in the early to mid 60s. This is in the late 60s, actually. There are many Christians. And that's why Nero was able to round them all up, as you're going to see. So there's all this unusual behavior. These whacked out emperors going crazy. People going insane. Not making any distinction between soldiers and civilians even. Right? So if you were a Christian, you were dead for sure. They let nothing indeed be kept secret, nothing be closed. Vitellianists, they pretended, might be thus concealed. Here was the first step to breaking open private houses. Here, if resistance was made, a pretext for slaughter. The most needy of the populace and the most worthless of the slaves did not fall for it. Did not fail to come forward, and betray their wealthy masters. Others were denounced by friends. Everywhere were lamentations and wailings, and all the miseries of a captured city, till the license of the Vitellianist and the Orthoniist, followers of Orthoniist soldiery, so once odious, was remembered with regret. The leaders of the party, so energetic in kindling civil strife, were incapable of checking the abuse of victory. In stirring up tumult and strife, the worst men can do the most. But peace and quiet cannot be established without virtue. All right. Now, let's go ahead and go to the annals. All right. And for the annals, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining me. But as you can see, we've got a lot of insanity going on here during this period in the 60s. At the time during which the Jewish War is also happening, that we're going to read more about next week. But this is deep, right after the death of Nero, and we're going to read now about part of Nero's reign, during which time people not only went insane, as you just read, and presented a threat to any and everyone, including the Christians, the seed of the woman. Nero specifically targeted him before all of that you just read. So let me go ahead and bring that up. This one we're going to read from an online version. Bring this up here. Make this bigger. This is classics.mit.edu. That looks okay. And we're going to be looking at book 15. All right, so now we're going backwards a little bit. We just read sections from Tacitus's histories about the period after Nero died that he described as unlike any other period since the foundation of Rome, based on all that had happened with the four Caesars during 68 to 69, all the other events that took place that we just read that were beyond anything else that had happened in terms of desecration and self-destruction, right? This is all happening as part of a civil strife, right? So if we look at Pompey and Julius Caesar potentially as this fatal wound, the civil war there, this is worse, right? That didn't affect the city of Rome, not in the way this did, right? Where the actual capital is burned. So I think this is a very strong candidate for this fatal wound to the seventh head, but that gets healed, right? Because it ends up getting healed. Vespasian comes back, and he's able to basically stop chaos from going crazy, right? He kills Vitellius, gets killed, all these people who are despicable. Not that Vespasian is like the best person ever, but he's a lot better than those people. And of course, Nero. But let's look at Nero a little bit more, right? Because I believe Nero, in addition to this being the period during which I believe the fatal wound of the seventh head that got healed occurred, I believe Nero represents the most likely point at which the dragon unleashed the beast. Before that, he unleashed the water. Earth came to the aid of the woman. And so the dragon went to the sand of the sea. He realized he had to do something with Rome. And he realized he could use them anyway to do what he wanted. He just didn't take the time to do that initially. He was so angry, just been thrown out. So he just immediately started attacking the woman and her seed, using everyone that he could use, like Judas. But he couldn't do that to Rome. For some reason, he didn't have the ability at that point to fully make them attack the Christians or the woman's seed. But he does something and gets this beast to come up that's basically him, but disguised as this beast. And now we do see Rome going insane and acting like a beast. Let me show you. In fact, not only acting like a beast, using beasts to kill the Christians. That seems like a pretty good parallel to me, right? The dragon's actually bringing up a beast to attack the woman and her seed. We literally get, during the very time during which this is all most likely to have occurred, after Jesus' resurrection, we get that very thing on the earth. We get the leader of the most powerful nation on the earth attacking the Christians with beasts, right? It's just amazing. And a lot more. But I mean, he puts beast skins on them, right? There's just so much of a connection here in ways that are really, to me, very interesting. But let's take a look at Nero a little bit more. So let's look at 37 to 39. Oh, let's see. I got to do this whole numbering thing again because of the way this thing is, but I think I can find it. Okay. Should be coming up here. Just don't want to go. Here we go. So we're going to read this paragraph, which is Tacitus's Annals. We're in book 15. And we're going to read paragraphs 37 through 39 if you're using the Loeb edition. They're not marked or numbered here, but that's what they are. So let's go ahead and start with 37. Oh, wait. I want to make sure you guys can see. In the year of the consulship of Caius Lecanius and Marcus Licinius, a yet keener impulse urged Nero. We're going to be reviewing, this is all about Nero here. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. Yeah, that's good. A yet keener impulse urged Nero to show himself frequently on public stage. Nero was a nut. He's gone, right? He's whacked out beyond belief. So he would descend in these common ways that really upset people, right? Nero loved to upset people, but, he was just so wild. So he would frequently get on stage in public, the Roman emperor, right? It's just not normal. And he would act not just for special roles. He would do all kinds. Oh, you're going to see. Perv. Hitherto he had sung in private houses or gardens during the juvenile games, but these he now despised as being but little frequented, and on too small a scale for so fine a voice. As, however, he did not venture to make a beginning at Rome, he chose Neapolis, because it was a Greek city. From this as his starting point, he might cross into Achaia, and there, winning the well-known and sacred garlands of antiquity, evoke with increased fame the enthusiasm of the citizens. Accordingly, a rabble of the townsfolk was brought together, with those whom the excitement of such an event had attracted from the neighboring towns and colonies, and such as followed in the emperor's train to pay him honor or for various objects. All these, with some companies of soldiers, filled the theater at Neapolis. There an incident occurred which many thought unlucky, though to the emperor it seemed due to the providence of auspicious deities. See if I can make that a little bigger for you guys. What? I think, yeah. That's obviously bigger and better. Let me get to that part, though. All right, so we got Nero in the public theater, and he's got things going on. He's acting weird. The people who had been present had quitted the theater, and the empty building then fell in without any harm to anyone. Thereupon Nero, in an elaborate ode, thanked the gods, celebrating the good luck which attended the late downfall. And as he was on his way to cross the sea of Hadria, he rested a while at Beneventum, where a crowded gladiatorial show was being exhibited by Vatinius. Right, so Nero, he felt there was some divine providence there and that no one got hurt after he had appeared at this theater. And then it talks about this gladiatorial show where he was being exhibited, that was being exhibited by this Vatinius. Talks about that guy. And you want to skip a few things. We don't have to read it all. Nero, deals with this guy who commits suicide, but that Nero said would have lived if he had just kept himself alive. Either way. So soon afterwards, giving up Achaia for the present, his reasons were not certainly known. He, that is Nero, returned to Rome. There, dwelling in his secret imaginations on the provinces of the east, especially Egypt. Let me make that up so you guys see it. Then, having declared in a public proclamation that his absence would not be long, and that all things in the state would remain unchanged and prosperous, he visited the temple of the capital for advice about his departure. There he adored the gods. Then he entered also the temple of Vesta, and there, feeling a sudden trembling through his limbs, either from terror inspired by the deity or because from the remembrance of his crimes, he was never free from fear. He relinquished his purpose, repeatedly saying that all his plans were of less account than his love of his country. And so he has this episode. He goes to the temple of the capital, and he goes to a temple of Vesta, and he starts trembling. Right? Something starts bothering him. And Tacitus, well, it's either the deity or he's too worried about his own crimes, right? He had seen the sad countenances of the citizens. He heard their secret complainings at the prospect of his entering on so long a journey. When they could not bear so much as his brief excursions, accustomed as they were to cheer themselves under mischances by the sight of the emperor. Hence, as in private relationships, the closest ties were the strongest. So the people of Rome had the most powerful claims and must be obeyed in their wish to retain him. These and the like sentiments suited the people, who craved amusement and feared, always their chief anxiety, scarcity of corn should be absent. The Senate and leading citizens were in doubt whether to regard him as more terrible at a distance or among them. After a while, as is the way with great terrors, they thought what happened the worst alternative. Nero, to win credit for himself, enjoying nothing so much as the capital, prepared banquets in the public places, and he used the whole city, so to say, as his private house. Watch how much of a perv this guy was right before he kills the Christians. Of these entertainments, the most famous for their notorious profligacy were those furnished by Tigellinus, which I will describe as an illustration that I may not have again and again to narrate similar extravagance. He had a raft constructed on Agrippa's lake, put the guest on board, and set it in motion by other vessels towing it. Is that where we want? I think that's where we want to go. Let me just make sure. Oh, yeah. That's right. These vessels glittered with gold and ivory, right? So this is Nero, right? This is an example of some of his insanity and extravagance and gone, right? The vessel, so he's made this kind of barge, a raft on Agrippa's lake. He's got his guests on there. He puts it in motion. Vessels glittered with gold and ivory. The crews were arranged according to age and experience and vice. That's whoever who was like more perv, right? You go over to Nero's boat. You had to be real experienced in perv and to get there. Brides and beasts had been procured from remote countries and sea monsters from the ocean, right? Again, as I said, and we know, Rome was very much involved in the procurement of all these different beasts, using them for entertainment, for executions, for clothing, and for cultic purposes. On the margin of the lake were set up brothels crowded with noble ladies. And on the opposite bank were seen naked prostitutes with obscene gestures and movements. As darkness approached, all the adjacent grove and surrounding buildings resounded with song and shone brilliantly with lights. Nero, who polluted himself by every lawful and lawless indulgence, that includes sodomy. Nero's a perv, right? He's going to perv it right here. Had not omitted a single abomination which could heighten his depravity. Right? You can't get any worse. No. He had not omitted a single abomination which could heighten his depravity. No one beat Nero when it came to sodomy. Okay? He probably had the first plug. Either way, till a few days afterward, he stooped to marry himself to one of that filthy herd. That's right. After he polluted himself with everything, didn't omit nothing, you couldn't heighten his depravity. He's done it all. Gone. A few days after that, he marries a perv. A perv named Pythagoras, with all forms, not the Pythagoras, that we know from, famous mathematician and geometry, with all the forms of regular wedlock. He married this perv, Nero, a Roman emperor, after all this perv appear. He then married this other perv with all the forms of regular wedlock. The bridal veil was put over the emperor. People saw the witnesses of the ceremony, the wedding dower, the couch, and the nuptial torches. Everything, in a word, was plainly visible, which, even when a woman weds darkness, hides. Perv. They're perving it. I mean, Nero has completely collapsed, but he still has more. Let's get to it, right? So let's skip a couple of, this stuff that's important. But we want to get to the other stuff, right? Let's see. This is going to be our last part right here, and then we're going to partake, everyone. But I'm trying to show you that I hope you've seen so far, consistent with what we've been discussing about Revelation 11 through 13 and the dragon and his attacks against the woman, right, and her seed, the Christians who are observing the commandments of God in Christ, promoting God and Jesus, right? The dragon's been attacking her. He used this water attack, and the earth helped her. And the dragon went and brought up this beast, and then went and killed the Christians. The account in the book of Revelation that we read in the prior parts, it says that. The redo of part 44, we read the whole chapter of 13, where it describes the dragon unleashing the beast to kill the Christians, which is exactly what happens. We're going to read that right now. But I'm helping you see how insane, what the change, right? There's just someone who's not altogether in town. There's someone, he's gone, right? He makes Caligula and his head wound and horse look like, a reasonable person. Nero is totally gone, right? I mean, this guy is the essence of it's like what Tacitus said. No one had been condemned before him, right? No emperor had been condemned before him like this. Nothing had happened in Rome like it happened like this, right? Things are crazy. Nero's crazy. He gets killed with all these emperors, everyone going nuts. All this profane activity. I think these events represent this fatal wound of the head of the beast that got healed, and that caused people to then look at it wonderingly and admiringly, which is exactly what happens. You're going to see as we continue forward. Next week, Jewish war overlaps with this period. Here we've got a beast. We've got a beast here that is totally different than anyone before him in ways that are unleashed on the Christians. And I'm going to share that with you right now. Now, and let me read a little context, right? Just so you see kind of how bad this was, this fire. It says, Nero at this time, we're in book 15 of Tacitus's Annals. We're around 40 through 44. And this version isn't numbered, so it takes me a little longer to get right where I want to get. Nero at this time was at Antium and did not return to Rome. This is the last part we're going to read about the Christians. Then we're going to partake and be done, okay? Thank you for joining me. Nero at this time was at Antium and did not return to Rome until the fire approached his house, which he had built to connect the palace with the gardens of Maecenas. It could not, however, be stopped from devouring the palace, the house, and everything around it. However, to relieve the people, driven out homeless as they were, he threw open to them the Campus Martius and the public buildings of Agrippa, and even his own gardens, and raised temporary structures to receive the destitute, brought up supplies of food. These acts, though popular, produced no effect, since a rumor had gone forth everywhere that at the very time when the city was in flames, the emperor appeared on a private stage and sang of the destruction of Troy, comparing present misfortunes with the calamities of antiquity. At last, after 5 days, an end was put to the conflagration at the foot of the Esquiline Hill by the destruction of all buildings on a vast space, so that the violence of the fire was met by a clear ground and on open sky. But before people had laid aside their fears, the flames returned with no less fury this second time. Sometimes that happens, right? If you don't put a fire out and embers continue to burn, this is exactly what can happen. And especially in the spacious districts of the city. Consequently, though there was less loss of life, the temples of the gods and the porticos which were devoted to enjoyment fell in a yet more widespread ruin. And to this conflagration, there attached a greater infamy because it broke out on the Aemilian property of Tigellinus. And it seemed that Nero was aiming at the glory of founding a new city and calling it by his name. Rome, indeed, is divided into 14 districts, 4 of which remain uninjured. 3 were leveled to the ground, while in the other 7 were left only a few shattered, half-burnt relics of houses. These were major fires, the fire and then the reignition. It would not be easy to enter into a computation of the private mansions, the blocks of tenements, and of temples which were lost. Those with the oldest ceremonial, as that dedicated by Servius Tullus to Luna, the great altar and shrine raised by the Arcadian Evander to the visibly appearing Hercules, the temple of Jupiter, the stair, which was vowed by Romulus, Numa's royal palace, and the sanctuary of Vesta, with the tutelary deities of the Roman people, were burnt. So too were the riches acquired by our many victories, various beauties of Greek art, then again the ancient and genuine historical monuments of genius, and, notwithstanding the striking splendor of the restored city, old men will remember many things which could not be replaced. It's massive, massive damage and destruction. Some persons observed that the beginning of this conflagration was on the 19th of July, the day on which the Senones captured and fired Rome. Others have pushed a curious inquiry so far as to reduce the interval between these two conflagrations into equal numbers of years, months, and days. Nero, meanwhile, availed himself of his country's desolation and erected a mansion in which the jewels of gold, long familiar objects, quite vulgarized by our extravagance, were not so marvelous as the fields and lakes, with woods on one side to resemble a wilderness, and on the other open spaces and extensive views. The directors and contrivers of the work were Severus and Celer, who had the genius and the audacity to attempt by art what nature had refused, and to fool away an emperor's resources. They had actually undertaken to sink a navigable canal from the lake Avernus to the mouths of the Tiber along a barren shore or through the face of hills, where one meets with no moisture which could supply water, except the Pompantine marshes. The rest of the country is broken rock and perfectly dry. Even if it could be cut through, the labor would be intolerable, and there would be no adequate result. Nero, however, with his love of the impossible, endeavored to dig through the nearest hills to Avernus, and there still remain the traces of his disappointed hope. Of Rome, meanwhile, so much was left unoccupied by his mansion, was not built up as it had been after. So much as was left unoccupied by his mansion was not built up, as it had been after its burning by the Gauls, without any regularity or any fashion, but with rows of streets according to measurement, with broad thoroughfares, with a restriction on the height of houses, with open spaces and the further addition of colonnades, as a protection to the frontage of the blocks of the tenements. These colonnades Nero promised to erect at his own expense, and to hand over the open spaces when cleared of the debris to the ground landlords. He also offered rewards proportioned to each person's position and property, and prescribed a period within which they were to obtain them on the completion of so many houses or blocks of building. He fixed on the marshes of Ostia for the reception of the rubbish, and arranged that the ships which had brought up corn by the Tiber should sail down the river with cargoes of this rubbish. The buildings themselves to a certain height were not to be solidly constructed, without wooden beams of stone. So it goes on to describe all these different places that made everyone suspect what we were reading about, that this was his intention all along, to change everything to his liking. I think that also fits something about the dragon, especially all the jewels and stones, right? Especially when we look at it in light of Ezekiel. I'm not saying these are necessary connections, but they're there, even if they're somewhat thin. There's something unusual going on here, for sure. There's not the love of posterity and things that were destroyed in the fires you might expect. Now, Nero is crazy, but is that it? Or is there more going on here? Well, there's certainly more with regard to the Christians, isn't there? Such indeed were... Okay, so let's see. The next thing was to seek means of propitiating the gods. And recourse was had, right? So after the fire, he goes through all this extensive building planning, wants to do all these things, doesn't care about all the destruction and everything that happened. Potentially was singing about the fall of Troy as it was going down. And then this is the final part. The next thing was to seek means of propitiating the gods, and recourse was had to the Sibylline books, by the direction of which prayers were offered to Vulcanus, Ceres, and Proserpina. Juno, too, was entreated by the matrons, first in the capital, and then on the nearest part of the coast, whence water was procured to sprinkle the fane and image of the goddess. So see, they're invoking these gods to find out why did this fire happen? Well, what do we need to do to avoid this? This is how bad it was. Right? They're trying to find out from the gods what's going on and entreating them because of this destruction. And there were sacred banquets and nightly vigils celebrated by married women. But all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiations of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the conflagration was the result of an order. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called the Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty, every Christian who admitted. Then thereupon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, that wasn't what they were admitting to, except under torture at one point, as of hatred against mankind. Now that's interesting, isn't it? If the dragon is using some very special attacks here, right? He's making things better for him physically in some way through his control of the beast, if it's Rome, as I believe. And at this point, he's in full control in a way where he's directly targeting them. Water attack that got blunted is over. Now he's come up with a battle plan where that's not going to get in the way this time. So he's got this whack job Nero, who is I would imagine as easily as Judas to be possessed. But either way, his actions certainly show a despicable character in nature beyond anything anyone had seen before. And in an emperor, no one more so condemned than him. And now he's trying to place blame on people who had nothing to do with it, just because he doesn't want to be blamed. That's something a dragon would do. That's a pretty wicked ploy, wouldn't you say? To have that much destruction happen to your beloved city and artifacts and history and all these incredible things, your temples, your gods. And you say these people did it. Right? I mean, that's going to unleash, as you're going to see, a beast. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths, covered with the skins of beasts. They were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt, to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. Isn't that terrible? This fits this terrible attack, right? This to me is the dragon. This is him so angry, especially after the water attack didn't work the way he wanted. He's been thrown out. Well, he's attacking the seed of the woman, is he not? Well, where's the seed of the woman? Right here, right? Well, if the dragon is attacking the seed of the woman, and the woman is right here, the seed of the woman, how could this not be the dragon? Who else is attacking the woman, the seed of the woman, but the dragon? It doesn't say anything about anyone else doing that. And here we have it. Here we have it. Within 30 years or so of Jesus dying and being resurrected, we've gone from this water attack that's blunted by the earth to something that is a wild beast no one can stop, and comes out of the earth and kills the Christians. Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle and was exhibiting a show in the circus, while he mingled with the people in the dress of a charioteer or stood aloft on a car. Hence, even for criminals who deserved extreme and exemplary punishment, there arose a feeling of compassion. For it was not, as it seemed, for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed. One man's cruelty or one dragon's cruelty through that man. Perv. See, there's something unusual going on here. It doesn't even make sense to the people whose city was destroyed. And it's being blamed on they don't, it doesn't make sense to them. Right? And They would be normally so blinded by revenge, it wouldn't matter. But the extreme degree that Nero went to for no reason, really, right? This doesn't make sense, everybody. He could have blamed just a group of brigands, right? He could have blamed a group of criminals. He could have blamed his enemy. He could have blamed anybody. But he picks these Christians. That seems like someone who hates. There's more going on here in my view. Why wouldn't he just pick someone he hates? He doesn't even know the Christians. Why wouldn't he pick someone he hates or despises, right? An opposing party or some group that he actually has a problem with? No, it's like it doesn't even matter. There's something else guiding him, it almost seems like to me. And if the dragon is doing what we read, attacking the woman and her seed, this is it. This is the most direct attack, period, since Jesus' death, which is what the dragon tried to stop initially, right? And a few encounters with the Christians, but nothing like this. Even the people, again, of the city of Rome are like, this doesn't work. We can't handle this. This guy is cruelty, right? This looks like a dragon who's very angry. There's something unusually bad coming from one entity. Even the people saw it that way. But it doesn't make any sense for Nero, right? He doesn't have that hatred. He doesn't even have any dealings with the Christians other than just think they're probably whacked out. Is that enough, you think, for this? This level of cruelty? Maybe, when you're that nuts. But it's sure also consistent with the dragon's hatred for the woman and her seed, isn't it? With the attacks we see described in Revelation 12 and 13, isn't it? Oh yeah, it is. We got more. Meanwhile, Italy was thoroughly exhausted by contributions of money. Let's see, I think actually that might be it. Yeah, that's actually it. That's where we need to read to. This doesn't right here. To me, this all fits with what we have discussed and what I believe is most likely the case, that when it comes to the dragon and the things we read about him doing in Revelation 11, well, really 12 and 13, when he gets thrown out of heaven, he's trying to stop the birth of the woman, birth of the child from the woman, and then the events thereafter that take place, I believe are consistent with Jesus being caught away to God's throne and resurrected, given all authority and power and seated on God's throne, with Satan being thrown out shortly thereafter, and being confined to the earth in a way that shows a hatred for the woman and her seed. I believe the woman represents God's Spirit, manifested in fire in the early part of the book of Acts after Jesus was raised, the helper, the one that he said would be sent to be with the Christians. That after the dragon couldn't stop her child being born in heaven, attacked her on the earth because she was on the earth helping the Christians. And then the dragon was unsuccessful in the water attack. The earth blunted it, which I believe is the initial attacks by the dragon through the Jews and the Greeks and some Romans, but not as an official policy that came about later, once the dragon took control of the thing that was blunting the water attack and used it as a beast to kill the early Christians. But it's not done doing that yet here with Nero. In fact, there's a lot more going on with respect to this dragon and the attack on the woman and her seed than in Rome. But this is important to see because it all ties in with what we've been talking about. It also ties in with what we will be talking about when it comes to the dragon that looks like a lamb that also directly involves Rome, as well as provide an understanding of the beast, its relationship to the water attack and the earth that preceded the multi-beast beast, And then the head of this multi-beast beast that has got a fatal wound but that gets healed. I believe all these things line up with the events after Jesus' resurrection with respect to Rome and its involvement with the Christians, both as the earth that helped the Christians with regard to the dragon's water, and then as this multi-beast beast that attacks and kills the Christians once the dragon takes more direct control of it. And this is not the end. We're going to deal with the Jewish war effects, which is also Rome, right? You've got Titus, Vespasian. All of that is, again, the dragon. But we'll get to that next week in part 44.3. And this attack continues. I believe this multi-beast beast, after the water attack, I believe the dragon uses this beast for a couple centuries until Constantine, at which time, once we get to it, I'll show the dragon became like a lamb and tried something different that actually worked very effectively and has worked very effectively for a long time in one sense. I guess if you're the dragon, right? Either way, he's attacking the woman. He's attacking her seed. And I believe we can see how these events fit with the history of the early Christians since Jesus' death and resurrection. And even to some extent before, if we go into Revelation chapter 11, right, like we did in part 44.1. See that for more. But I believe that chapter's connection with Matthew 27 helps us make that more concrete and clear. Nothing essential required here. We're trying our best to make the most sense of what we have here so that we can feel good about these texts and utilize them in whatever way we can, in addition to promoting the three things: one God the Father, Jah, Jesus the firstborn Son, Savior, and the Golden Rule. So I thank you all for being with me. Good to see you, Tarantula Clan. Thank you for joining us. All the rest of you, have a wonderful evening and rest of your weekend, or morning, afternoon, I guess, depending on where you are. No live show tomorrow, but I do have a couple videos, clips from other shows that I think will be helpful to you. So I will be uploading those. Otherwise, I'll see you again next Saturday for our continuing study of the book of Revelation, chapters 11 through 13 specifically, talking more about this dragon as the multi-beast beast and the effects that the multi-beast beast had on the early Christians from this period forward, and some overlapping, again, because we're going to talk about the Jewish war during this same period of the four emperors, basically, and the time of Nero through to Vespasian. So there's some overlap, but a different area and different attack, and really nowhere near the end of it. It continues on for quite some time. So we'll review it briefly, but enough to where we get the highlights, right? You can always read this material on your own, but there's so much of it. I try to capture the basic details, the essential details from these histories, apply them to our understanding of the Bible, so that we can come away feeling refreshed and somewhat enlightened, right? With a proper perspective that is healthy to have as a Christian in this world. So I thank you all for joining me. We have to partake, right? We don't want to forget that. Almost forgot, but not. We thank God the Father for everything he's done, especially in sending his Son to give his life in service to the one God, that we might also live and serve the one God. In Jesus' name. It's in Jesus' name because he came. Yeah, Jesus' name because he came. Gave his body and blood for the Father's sake and for ours, that we might have life because of him. So with that said, I thank you all once again. I'll see you all next week. Couple uploads tomorrow, but live show next Saturday. Until then, may Jah bless you. In Jesus' name.